Vivienne didn't know that the masked stranger watching her from across the ballroom was the most powerful man in the Five Kingdoms. She only knew that his gaze felt like fire against her skin, and that she desperately needed to disappear before Marcus found her. The crystal gala blazed with 1,000 candles, their light fracturing through chandeliers and scattering diamonds across the marble floor. Vivienne pressed herself against a pillar, her borrowed gown too tight, her heart beating too fast. She shouldn't be here. Servants weren't invited to the kingdom's most exclusive event, but her mistress had fallen ill, and someone needed to deliver the documents to Lord Ashworth before midnight. The silk of her borrowed dress whispered against her legs as she moved. Lady Ashworth had been kind to lend it, had even helped pin up Vivienne's dark hair into something resembling elegance. But kindness couldn't change what Vivienne was, a servant pretending to be something more, a fraud waiting to be discovered. She'd almost made it to the east corridor when she felt it, a prickle at the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched by something predatory. Vivienne turned, and her breath caught. He stood near the fountain, surrounded by nobles who competed for his attention, yet his focus had somehow found her. The mask he wore was obsidian black, covering the upper half of his face, but nothing could hide those eyes. They were the color of winter storms, pale and piercing and utterly fixed on her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black velvet that seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. Something in her chest pulled, a thread she hadn't known existed suddenly going taut. She looked away quickly, pulse hammering. Ridiculous. She was being ridiculous. Men like that didn't notice women like her. Men like that didn't notice anyone who couldn't offer them power or pleasure or political advantage. She was invisible by design, had spent years perfecting the art of disappearing into the background. So why did she feel like he'd looked straight through to her soul? Vivienne gathered her skirts and moved toward the corridor, clutching the sealed documents against her chest like armor. 3 more minutes. She just needed 3 more minutes. And then she could return to the servants' quarters, shed this borrowed finery, and pretend this night had never happened. She was 10 steps from freedom when a hand closed around her arm. The voice that followed turned her blood to ice. Well, well, look what crawled out of the kitchen. Marcus. Of course it was Marcus, the man she'd once believed would marry her, before she discovered that his promises were as empty as his heart. Before she learned that 3 years of courtship meant nothing when a wealthier prospect appeared. He'd left her standing alone in the garden where he'd first kissed her, coldly explaining that Lord Pemberton's daughter had a better dowry, and he'd be a fool not to pursue it. He smiled at her now, but there was no warmth in it. There never had been, she realized. She'd simply been too desperate to see it. I wondered if you'd have the nerve to show your face here. His grip tightened, fingers digging into soft flesh. Did you think I wouldn't recognize you in that dress? It's clearly not yours. The stitching is all wrong for your station. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. It tells me you want more stories like this. Vivienne lifted her chin, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. Let go of me, Marcus. I'm here on business for Lady Ashworth. Business? He laughed, and the sound drew glances from nearby guests. You're here because you're pathetic, because you can't accept that I chose someone better. The words stung, even now. Even after everything. She hated that they still had power over her, that some small part of her still wondered if he was right. If there was something fundamentally unlovable about her, some flaw she couldn't see that drove people away. His voice rose, deliberately theatrical. Playing to an audience. He'd always loved an audience. Look at her, Marcus announced to the gathering crowd, his arms sweeping wide with practiced drama. She used to beg me to marry her. Actually begged. On her knees, promising she'd be whatever I needed. His smile turned cruel, lips curling with satisfaction. But no one would choose you, Vivienne. Not for anything that matters. You're nothing but a servant playing dress-up, pretending you could ever belong in a world like this. The words landed like physical blows. Vivienne felt her face flush with humiliation, felt the weight of dozens of stares pressing down on her shoulders. She could hear whispers spreading through the crowd like poison, could see the pitying looks and the smug smiles of people who would dine out on this story for weeks. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the floor, but her feet wouldn't move. "I believe," a voice said from behind her, low and deadly calm, "that the lady asked you to release her." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus's face went pale, then ashen, his grip falling away from Vivienne's arm as though she'd burned him. The whispers stopped. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. She turned. The masked stranger stood there, close enough now that she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the dark hair that fell across his forehead, the barely contained fury in those winter storm eyes. Up close, he was even more imposing, taller, broader. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and the nobles who had been pressing close moments ago had suddenly found reasons to step back. The pull she'd felt before intensified into something almost painful. A hook behind her ribs, tugging her toward him. "Your Majesty," Marcus breathed, and Vivienne's world tilted on its axis. "Your Majesty." The stranger reached for her hand. His touch was gentle, but something about it felt inevitable, like gravity itself had decided they should be connected. His skin was warm against hers, his fingers calloused in a way that spoke of sword training rather than soft palace living. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted her fingers to his lips. He kissed them, in full view of everyone. The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. Vivienne's heart stopped. Started again at twice its normal speed. "I believe introductions are in order," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I am Theron Veilcrest, king of the northern reaches." The corner of his mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile but promised to become one. "And you, I suspect, are far more than this fool realizes." Vivienne couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The Alpha King. She was standing in front of the Alpha King, the most powerful ruler in the known world, the man whose very name made other monarchs nervous, and he was holding her hand, like she was made of something precious. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I." His thumb traced a slow circle against her palm, and heat bloomed through her entire body. "But I intend to find out." He turned to face Marcus, who had gone the color of old milk. The nobleman's earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by naked terror. His hands trembled at his sides. You will apologize to the lady." "Your Majesty, Now." The word cracked through the air like a whip. Marcus flinched, then dropped into an immediate bow, nearly folding in half in his haste to comply. "I apologize. Profoundly. Please forgive my behavior." Theron's expression didn't change. His voice remained perfectly even, perfectly controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying. "That apology wasn't for me. Look at her when you speak." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he lifted his head and met Vivienne's eyes. The hatred there was barely concealed, but beneath it she could see fear. Real, genuine fear. I apologize, Vivienne. My words were beneath me." They both knew it wasn't sincere. They both knew he was only sorry he'd been caught. But somehow, with Theron's hand still wrapped around hers, Vivienne found she didn't care. "I accept," she said quietly. Theron guided her away from the crowd, his palm settling against the small of her back, with an easy possessiveness that should have alarmed her. Instead, it felt right. Like his hand had been made to rest there. Like she'd been waiting her whole life for exactly this touch. The nobles parted before them like water around a stone. No one dared to follow. "You're trembling," he observed as they stepped onto a moonlit terrace. "You're the Alpha King." "So I've been told." "And you just publicly defended a servant in front of the entire court." "I defended a woman who was being treated badly." He released her, putting distance between them, and the sudden absence of his warmth felt like a loss. The night air rushed in to fill the space where his hand had been. The fact that she's a servant is irrelevant. Vivienne studied him. The mask still obscured half his face, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight control in every line of his body. He moved to the balcony railing and gripped it, staring out at the gardens below. "You don't believe that," she said. "No one in your position believes that. I've worked in noble houses for 12 years. I know how the world works." And yet, he glanced at her over his shoulder. "Here we are." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. There must be 100 political calculations I'm not seeing. Some reason this benefits you? Must there?" The question stopped her cold. For a long moment, Theron didn't speak. The sounds of the gala drifted through the glass doors behind them, muffled music and distant laughter that seemed to belong to a different world. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something rough and honest. "Because I know what it feels like to be judged by circumstance rather than character. Because cruelty deserves to be challenged, regardless of the victim's rank." He turned to face her fully, and something flickered in those pale eyes. Something vulnerable. "And because when I saw you across that ballroom, something in my chest told me I needed to reach you. Before I could even understand why. Before I could think, or calculate, or strategize. I just knew." The confession hung between them. Vivienne knew she should be afraid. This was mad. This was impossible. This was the kind of thing that happened in stories. Not in real life. Not to women who spent their days scrubbing floors and carrying messages. Kings didn't rescue servants. Kings certainly didn't look at servants the way Theron was looking at her now, like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. But when she looked at him, she felt it too. That inexplicable pull. That thread going taut. "I should go," she said, though her feet didn't move. "Yes," he agreed. "You probably should." Neither of them went anywhere. The night air wrapped around them like a cocoon, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and something else, something that was simply him. Cedar, and smoke, and winter wind. Vivienne found herself moving closer without deciding to, drawn by an instinct older than reason. "What's your name?" Theron asked softly. Vivienne." He tested it on his tongue, and the sound made her shiver. "Vivienne. The man who dismissed you is a fool." "He's not wrong about what I am. He's wrong about everything." Theron turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze pinned her in place. "You walked into a room full of people who would destroy you for sport, and you held your head high. You faced humiliation with dignity. You didn't cry. You didn't beg. You didn't cower." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "You have more courage than half my generals, more poise than any of the simpering nobles who've been throwing themselves at me all evening. Don't you dare let that worm convince you that you're less than what you are." Something cracked open in Vivienne's chest, a wall she'd built so carefully, brick by brick, over years of disappointment and dismissal. No one had ever spoken to her like this, like she mattered, like she was visible. "You don't know me," she managed. "No." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "But I find I very much want to." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of conversation and connection. They stayed on that terrace while the gala blazed inside, while nobles searched for their king and servants whispered about the woman he'd championed. Theron shed his formal posture as the night deepened, leaning against the railing with an ease that seemed foreign to him, like a mask removed even more significant than the one still covering his eyes. He told her about the burden of rule, the loneliness of a crown no one asked for. His father had died when Theron was 19, leaving him a kingdom on the brink of war and a court full of vipers waiting to see if the young king would falter. "I didn't," he said, But some days I wanted to. Some days the weight of it feels like drowning, surrounded by hundreds of people and not a single one who sees anything but the crown. Vivian told him about her parents, lost to fever when she was 12, about the years of service, the homes she'd moved through, the hopes she'd surrendered one by one until she'd taught herself to stop having them, about Marcus, not because he deserved the mention, but because the wound was still fresh enough to bleed. "I thought he loved me," she admitted. "I thought if I was good enough, patient enough, loyal enough, he would see my value. I didn't realize until later that some people are incapable of seeing value in anyone but themselves." Theron listened to everything, not politely, not with half his attention elsewhere, but completely, as though her words were the most important thing in the world, as though her pain deserved the same gravity as matters of state. When the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Theron removed his mask. Vivienne's breath caught. She'd thought he was handsome before, but without the mask, he was devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a strong brow, a mouth made for both command and tenderness. A thin scar traced his left temple, disappearing into his hairline. But it was his eyes that undid her. Unguarded now. Vulnerable. Looking at her like she held answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. "No one sees me without this," he said quietly. "At court, I'm always performing, always calculating, always the alpha king, never just Theron." He held the mask in his hands, turning it over like it was something foreign. "But with you..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "What happens now?" Vivian asked. "I don't know." His hand lifted to her face, fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "But I'm not ready for this night to end. I'm still a servant. I'm still a king who hasn't felt anything real in years." He leaned closer, and his breath ghosted across her lips. "Tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me this is madness and I'll walk away. But don't tell me you don't feel it too." She should tell him to stop. She should run, return to her life, forget this impossible dream. Instead, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question asked in the language of touch. But then Theron's control shattered. His hand slid into her hair, scattering pins, and he kissed her like a drowning man gasping for air, like she was the answer to a prayer he'd forgotten how to speak. Vivian melted into him. Every rational thought dissolved. There was only this. Only him. Only the golden thread between them pulling tighter and tighter until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theron pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay," he whispered, "not as a servant, not as anything but yourself. Just stay." "For how long?" His eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her heart stop. "For as long as you'll have me." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Vivienne had expected resistance. She had expected the dream to end, for Theron to wake up and realize what he'd done, for the court to convince him that she was a mistake, a momentary madness best forgotten. None of that happened. Theron installed Vivian in guest chambers near his own, ignoring the scandal it caused among the court. When Lord Ashworth requested her return to service, Theron responded with a letter so coldly polite that the Lord never mentioned it again. The whispers were relentless, the glares from noble ladies poisonous, but he stood between her and all of it like a wall of stone. He took breakfast with her each morning, dismissing his advisors so they could have those quiet hours together. He walked with her through the palace gardens each evening, pointing out the flowers his mother had planted before her death. He brought her books from his personal library, then stayed to discuss them. He asked her opinion on matters of state, and when she offered suggestions, he actually listened. "The grain shortage in the eastern provinces," he said one afternoon, spreading maps across his desk. Vivian had grown comfortable in his study now, curled in the window seat with her own stack of documents. My advisors suggest we increase taxation to fund emergency supplies. Vivienne studied the papers he'd given her. The eastern provinces are already the poorest in the kingdom. Additional taxation will breed resentment, possibly rebellion. My advisors claim we have no other option. Your advisors have never gone hungry. She crossed to the desk and traced a supply route with her finger. What if you redirected the surplus from the military stores instead? The army is well fed. They can spare a portion while the farmers recover. It builds goodwill with the common people and shows strength through generosity rather than force. Theron stared at her. Then he laughed, the sound warm and surprised and wonderful. Do you have any idea how many scholars and generals I consulted before you walked in here? Probably too many. Probably. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. You see things they can't. You understand what it means to need, to lack, to hope for better. That perspective is worth more than 1,000 noble educations. Vivienne felt herself flush. I'm just saying what seems obvious. Nothing about you is just anything. His gaze softened and he pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees. You've transformed every room you've entered. You've transformed me. I didn't know I could feel like this. I didn't know I could want someone so much it terrifies me. The confession stole her breath. But happiness, Vivienne had learned, was always temporary. The attack came on a moonless night. Vivienne woke to shouting, to the clash of steel, to flames licking at the edges of her window. The acrid smell of smoke filled her lungs. Before she could fully understand what was happening, strong arms wrapped around her, lifting her from the bed. Theron. His face was grim, his eyes hard with fury. He wore no shirt, had clearly come directly from his own chambers, and his chest was marked with old battle scars she'd never seen before. A sword hung at his hip. Assassins. They breached the outer walls. How? I don't know yet. He carried her through a hidden passage, his steps swift and certain even in darkness. But I know why. Someone discovered that you matter to me. They're trying to use you as leverage. Vivienne's heart pounded. Then leave me. If I'm the target, then protecting me puts you in danger. No. The word came out like a growl. His arms tightened around her. I will not lose you. Not to politics, not to enemies, not to anything. You are mine, Vivienne. Mine to protect. Mine to keep safe. Mine. They emerged into a fortified safe room, and Theron set her down gently before turning to face the door. His entire posture changed. He was no longer the man who brought her flowers and asked about her childhood. He was the Alpha King, a predator defending what was his. Stay behind me, he commanded. The door burst open. 3 masked figures poured through, blades gleaming in the torchlight. Theron met them without hesitation, his movements brutal and efficient. He fought like a storm, all controlled devastation, his blade singing through the air. Within moments, 2 attackers lay groaning on the floor, disarmed and clutching wounds that would heal, but would slow them long enough to be restrained. The third hesitated, saw his chance, lunged toward Vivienne. She reacted on instinct. Her hand closed around a heavy candlestick from the table beside her, and she swung it hard, connecting with the assassin's temple. He crumpled. Silence fell. Theron stared at her, chest heaving, something wild and awed in his expression. You, he breathed, are magnificent. Vivienne's hands were shaking. The candlestick slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. I just hit him with the candlestick. You saved your own life. He crossed to her in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm, slightly rough, infinitely gentle. Do you understand now? You were never weak. You were never less than. You've always been extraordinary. You just needed someone to see it. Tears pricked at her eyes. Theron, I love you. The words hung in the air, raw and real. I love you, Vivienne, not despite your past, but because of who that past made you. I love your strength and your kindness and your practical wisdom. I love that you argue with me and challenge me and make me want to be better than I am. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. I love you, and I want you beside me. Not as a guest, not as a companion, as my queen. Vivian's breath stopped. I can't ask you to give up everything you've built. You're not asking. Her voice cracked. You're offering, and She closed her eyes, feeling the truth rise up from somewhere deep inside her. A truth she'd been too afraid to name. I love you too. I've loved you since that terrace. Maybe since before. Maybe since the moment I saw you across that ballroom and felt something impossible pull me toward you. Theron's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He kissed her then, tender and fierce, and full of promise. And Vivian kissed him back, finally letting go of every wall she'd ever built, finally allowing herself to believe that she deserved this, that she deserved him, that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about what was possible. The investigation revealed Marcus as the conspiracy's source. He stood before the throne a week later, stripped of his fine clothes and haughty bearing, trembling as the evidence of his treachery was read aloud. He'd funded the assassins with his wife's dowry. He'd provided the palace maps from his visits as a nobleman. He'd done it all because he couldn't bear that the woman he'd discarded had risen higher than he ever could. Vivian watched from Theron's side, wearing the crown that had been placed on her head 3 days before. The gold felt heavy and strange on her brow, but Theron's hand in hers felt right. She felt no satisfaction in Marcus's downfall. Only a weary kind of closure. You should have let her go, Theron said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. You should have been grateful for the years she wasted on you and wished her well. Instead, you chose hatred. You chose destruction. You chose to burn what you couldn't control. He stood, and power rolled off him in waves. You will spend the rest of your life in the northern dungeons. Perhaps the cold will teach you the warmth you refuse to offer others. Guards dragged Marcus away. His screams echoed long after he'd disappeared. Vivian stood motionless, watching the doors close behind the man who had once held her heart. She felt Theron's hand tighten around hers, a silent question. She squeezed back. She was all right. More than all right. She'd wasted years believing Marcus's cruelty was her fault. That if she'd been prettier or richer or more refined, he would have chosen her. Now she understood the truth. His inability to love had nothing to do with her worth. Some people were simply broken in ways they refused to fix. That evening, in their chambers, Theron found Vivian on the balcony, staring at the stars. Are you all right? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back into his warmth instinctively, letting his strength support her. I'm not sure. She sighed. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. For someone to tell me this was all a mistake. That I don't belong here. You belong wherever I am. He pressed a kiss to her hair. And I'm not going anywhere. You married a servant, Theron. Half your court thinks you've lost your mind. And half my court has since watched you resolve a trade dispute that plagued us for a decade, charm an ambassador who's refused every diplomatic overture for 5 years, and design a grain distribution system that's already saving lives in the eastern provinces. He turned her in his arms. They're learning, slowly, but they're learning what I already knew. That you're the best thing that ever happened to this kingdom, to me. Vivian reached up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble there. I love you. I know. His eyes crinkled. I love you more. That's not a competition. Everything's a competition. He kissed the tip of her nose. And I intend to win. 2 months later, Vivian stood on the same terrace where they'd first talked, watching the sun set over the kingdom she now helped rule. The sky blazed in shades of amber and rose, painting the castle gardens in warm light. In the distance, She could see farmers returning from fields that were thriving now, their families secure because of policies she'd helped shape. Children played in the village squares, their laughter carrying on the wind. Life, she realized. She'd helped make room for life to flourish. So much had changed. She had advisors now, and responsibilities, and a schedule that would have horrified her servant self. She'd learned to navigate court politics with grace and firmness in equal measure. She'd discovered strengths she never knew she had. She'd built a life that 12-year-old Vivienne, grieving and alone, could never have imagined. But more than that, she'd found love, real love, the kind that didn't require her to be less so, someone else could be more. The kind that celebrated who she was rather than trying to change her. The kind that made her feel like she could face anything, as long as she wasn't facing it alone. Footsteps approached, and then familiar arms circled her waist. She knew his touch instinctively now, knew the rhythm of his heartbeat against her back, the exact temperature of his skin, the way his breath caught when he first held her each evening. "The ambassador from the Southern Isles is waiting," Theron murmured against her ear. Pauses. "He's been waiting for half an hour, actually. He's starting to look nervous." "Let him wait." Vivienne laughed softly. "I'm the queen. I'm allowed to watch one sunset in peace." "You're the queen, which means your peace is everyone else's luxury." But he didn't move to leave. Instead, he held her tighter, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you remember what you told me that first night? That I was nothing but a servant playing dress-up?" "No, that you'd stopped having dreams." He turned her to face him. "Do you still believe that? That dreams aren't for women like you?" Vivienne considered the question. She thought about the girl who'd walked into that ballroom, terrified and invisible. She thought about the woman she'd become, confident, valued, loved. "No," she said finally. "I think dreams are for anyone brave enough to claim them." Theron smiled, and it was the smile he only ever gave her. Soft, unguarded, completely devoted. "Good." He kissed her forehead. "Because I have many more dreams for us, my love. And I intend for us to claim every single one." Vivienne laughed, and the sound carried across the terrace, mixing with the evening birdsong. She'd once believed no one would choose her, that she was destined to be overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. She'd been wrong. The right person hadn't just chosen her. He'd seen her. He'd fought for her. He'd crowned her. And together, they would build something extraordinary. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.